Nah, boy, I've read it a long time ago, so I was...
Hello and welcome to the Super 70 Podcast. Special report with Film is Lit. Last month, I dropped a commentary episode on Katsushiro Otomo's Akira, guest starring Laura Seiling and Danny Gaylord from the Film is Lit podcast, and their friend and self-appointed manga enthusiast Ryan Burns. We had so much fun doing that, we decided to do this special report in which we wander through discussions of psychology and Akira, race and Ghost in the Shell, misogyny and blue is the warmest color, and we end by pondering, what is our Rushmore of Film is Lit?
The more and more I think about it, I think it's Tetsuo's story. Really. And Canada is the one who gets all the attention, and Akira is the sort of the elephant in the room that nobody likes to talk about. So we were talking before about live action. Laura, I have to give you an enormous amount of credit for keeping the podcast on track. There are many times where you were diving in, starting with and that's what I like about this scene.
Oh, nice,
and it was very clear that the tangent was chased, and oh yes, that's right, we're doing a commentary. So I appreciate that.
Oh, of course.
But in reference to your, we were talking about live action for a while. Wouldn't it be cool to have a live action of X, Y, and Z, including Akira? And yes, the live action found funding in 2019. They went into pre-production, and Leonardo DiCaprio licensed the product personally, and he was the one who secured funding. And he gave the screenplay to someone I had never heard of before. And then it was assigned to Taika Waititi as director.
Huh. Okay. Very cool.
So they were supposed to start shooting. Guess when?
Oh, 2019. Yeah. Yeah.
They were. Well, that's when the funding was approved. They were supposed to start shooting principal photography in the summer of 20.
Okay.
And as far as I know, it's dead.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And DiCaprio was not supposed to star in it. He was not supposed to be in the film.
Well, that would make sense. Yeah, he's
right. Yeah, that's what Taika Waititi was saying. He wasn't going to whitewash and or anything like that. He was going to stick purely with Asian actors.
Yeah, I would say that's probably the right call.
All right. So now that we've brought up the whitewashing situation, let's go ahead and jump right into Ghost in the Shell.
Heck yeah.
Ryan, I want to start with you. I want to hear all of your thoughts on Ms. Johansson and Ghost in the Shell.
It's tough. I think there's two ways to look at it. There's the obvious response of, if you watch the anime and you understand the characters, who they're supposed to be, it's a big question mark as to why. Why would you pick her? Why wouldn't you stick with something or a casting that is going to represent the characters in a way that's a little more pure, I think, to the form. Having said that, as an action movie, I think it's enjoyable. It departs enough from the original. I haven't read the manga, but I've seen the original film as well as I think it's standalone complex. I think the additional installments several times. I love Ghost in the Shell. I think it's a deeply existential philosophical film, and it asks a lot of very good questions that are becoming more relevant, as we go through time, especially with, where we're at as a world today. But, I appreciated the live action remake. I thought that they hit on, a lot of the things that made the original animated film, attractive from an action standpoint. I don't agree with the casting. I don't think that was a good move. I think it was a big detriment to the reception of the film overall. I think she did a great job for the role that, she was presented with, in the situation that she was in. But, I think that it should be redone in a better way, if that makes any sense. I'm not trying to give a vague answer of whether, I loved or hated, the remake. I think it was fine, but I think that they kind of fumbled it in several different ways that didn't really they kind of did a disservice to the original story and the original film. So I don't know. Do you agree or disagree?
I want to hear Laura's take first.
I've never seen that movie.
Oh my!
I didn't get to
God.
watch it. I'm so sorry.
You had one job.
I'm sorry.
Annie?
I wonder if I look away from the mic, he won't ask me if I've seen it either. Ryan has recommended it, the original anime film to me, but it's on our watch list and we want to do it for our podcast, but it hasn't happened yet. And I'm a big Letterboxd guy, and that the Ghost in the Shell on Letterboxd was ravaged by users, and that's kind of pushed it farther down the watch list. It hasn't been a huge priority, but we're going to get to it soon. When it came out, I was heavily invested in the story and reading about the controversy and the reception. And I think Scarlett Johansson is supremely talented actress. How she handled the controversy in the press, I don't think she also handled it as elegantly as she could have. She kind of gave like anyone can play anyone type of response, and which further hurt the movie. And it doesn't seem to have a huge cultural impact because of that. As Ryan was saying, that it really hindered the reception. So yeah, we're definitely going to get around to the anime soon. But at this time, we have no comment on the live action movie.
Can I add something? I knew that there was a point I was forgetting, and I think it actually is very fair to bring this up in light of kind of my critique a minute ago. But so the role of, Kusanagi, who also is known as the Major, is who Johansson plays. And she's basically a human brain inside this robotic body that's built and designed and provided by the government. You kind of sign a waiver to be, this program that she's working for. You sign away basically all your rights, and they, the government kind of takes, control and puts you in this body. And there's a big, theme of, human meets machine. Now, the one point arguing for Johansson is that, as I was reading through this, just out of curiosity, the Major is presented as a very androgynous figure in the film. She's obviously female, obviously a woman, but the way that they animate her and depict her is there's sometimes questions as to whether she's American or Japanese or what her, ethnic background is. And it's kind of a gray area because she's a human brain operating within a robotic body. And then it just leaves a gray area. And I think that might have lent argument towards casting someone that necessarily wasn't of the supposed, ethnic background that would have been presumed. So I guess that was just an interesting point that I read a while ago that I feel is fair to kind of, provide on the other end of the argument spectrum, maybe. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Oh, that's good. There's a lot to unpack with that particular film. She got into trouble because exactly what she said. Anybody can play any role, and there was no nuance led into the interview. Is the problem?
Exactly.
Matt Damon caught a shitload for saying basically, "I wish we didn't know people's sexuality because you have gay actors playing straight men and straight men playing gay actors, and it works better if you're just unfamiliar with what sexuality somebody is." Everyone knows that Rupert Everett is gay. He's been playing straight actors most of his life. And I don't think that he came out of the closet like when he was a teenager or something. So I understand what Damon was saying.
Right.
But everyone else just wants to drop nuance to the floor, and they just want to grab a soundbite, and they want everything to be controversial, and that makes everything else that Damon says after the fact suspect. So I went to see The Last Duel a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, we want to see that.
Yeah, I can't wait to see that.
I haven't seen it yet.
An absolutely amazing film, and it's based on historical evidence. It's based on something that happened in France about 1,000 years ago, which I was unfamiliar with. I'm not a medieval historian, and but it's also based on Rushmore. So within the first 35 minutes, my son and I just instantly, this is Rushmore. And I didn't know that it was real until I left. Then I heard a podcast where Damon went on to Mark Maron and talked about The Last Duel and said that he and Ben wrote the script. Again, something I didn't know. And then they wrote the first part, which was Ben's story, or rather Matt's story. Then they wrote the second part, which is Adam Driver's story. Then the third part, which is the wife's story. And they were not satisfied with how the wife's story was turning out. So they went and hired the best screenwriter they thought, who was female, to write the third part of the script for them, because they just didn't have that confidence in themselves. I've read unbelievable reviews that say, the only reason why Matt Damon did this is to make up for all this shit that he said 2 years ago.
Interesting.
And I hate Bill Maher, but occasionally little nuggets come out of Bill Maher that you think, well, you're an asshole, but occasionally you say things that ring true. And one of the things that he said, like Justin Timberlake apologized to the world for the way he treated Britney Spears when they were fucking teenagers.
Right.
Like we come out of the womb perfect. I've said shit as a teenager that I wouldn't say today in the corner of my room with the lights turned off with anybody within a square mile of. I grew up in Texas, for Christ's sake.
Right.
I can't tell you the amount of shit that I used to thought was acceptable. And because I don't think that is acceptable now doesn't mean I'm woke. Just means that I've changed my thinking, and hopefully for the better. Hopefully that happens when you get older. Matt Damon's older than me. I think that the man can grow. Mm-hmm. And I hope that Miss Johansson can too. Getting back to Ghost in the Shell.
Nice.
They specifically said in the film, this goes back to your point, Ryan, where she is a ghost placed into a shell. And what is the nature of that ghost? And what does it mean to be inside this shell? That was very much what the manga was trying to explore. You are a tool. Whose tool? What for? What purpose? And who are you ultimately serving? And does the soul have any type of ownership over the shell? Well, we may have. There they are. And they specifically styled Ms. Johansson's eyebrows to look Japanese. Which the first time I saw it on screen, I thought, oh, shit, that's not good. Sean Connery had amazing prosthesis put onto his face for the Bond film, You Only Live Twice, where he was supposed to look more Japanese. That has not aged well.
No.
But if you think about it in terms of this is her shell, and they're in Japan, isn't the shell supposed to look Japanese?
Mm.
That would make sense.
Right.
What doesn't make sense is the fact that she's just so pale white. They could have done something about that. But if you look at the manga, the book, she's pretty white in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And not that much darker in the anime. The one thing that confuses all of it is the fact that I think 2/3 through the movie, she mentions that she's a refugee. So she's admitting that she's not Japanese at all. Her ghost is not Japanese. And here she is being placed into this Japanese shell. I think if they hit that hammer any harder, or if they hit that nail any harder, it would have looked really like they were trying very hard to convince you that there is no race issue here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a nuance there that we can be comfortable with. But ultimately, I think the setting is inappropriate. If you want to remake Ghost in a Shell with an American Hollywood actress, which is it's the reason why you want to do it, is so that you can get butts in seats, pay the tickets. We all know this.
Mm.
They should not have said it in Tokyo.
Mm.
They should have said it in London or in New York, somewhere where her appearance would fit the locale. That might have been another argument. Instead of whitewashing one character, you're whitewashing the entire movie. But we do that shit all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Spike Lee remade Old Boy, famous Japanese film, and nobody said anything about it.
Right.
Replaced a Japanese actor with Josh Brolin.
Yeah.
And to say, well, you can do that because Spike Lee's black. Like, whoa. Then you get into that argument. Why is it acceptable for certain directors to do things and other directors not? Race in today's society is just it's such a labyrinth to go around. And at the end of the film, and this is what gets me about the entire experience. I took my son, we went to Star Cinema Grill. I fucking love that film.
Mm-hmm.
I really do. It's really close to the manga. There are shots right out of the film, the anime, and there are shots right out of the book. It doesn't follow the exact same plot, so you're not bored with it. And I think how they handled her sexuality, like Ryan was talking about, was appropriate. There are people that very obviously want to see Scarlett Johansson as the Major because in the manga, several times, it appears that she's nude. And they were playing off of that in the trailers. They were playing off of that in the posters. And they were playing off of that in the film. But that's okay. Like the race thing that's not okay. But to exploit the female body on screen for 2 hours, that's fine. Or to do that in an anime, that's okay. To do that in a graphic novel, that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So really, we're choosing which arguments we care about as cinema goers.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another problem I have with the criticism of the film. But as a narrative, I think that it works. And the reason that it works is, despite all the race issues and despite all the sex issues, they really did try to stick to the story as much as possible. And that's why I enjoyed it. I didn't go to see Ghost in a Shell because I thought it would be different. I went because I thought it would be the same.
Interesting.
And it was 80% the same.
Yeah.
There were other things going on in the periphery which were unnecessary. Her partner has blonde hair. And he's got blonde hair in the anime, and he's got blonde hair in the manga.
Yep.
So how is that whitewashing? Right. I mean, find a Japanese guy with blonde hair,
Yeah.
Well, in Bato's, character, even in the anime, his prosthetics and his technological kind of implants, his tech implants are such that, it shields or leaves to question, where he came from or who he really is. I mean, it's very interesting. That's a great point. I mean, he does have like this cool silk stockings, flat top that's blonde. And the other thing is that I think that there's actually a fair amount of diversity in the anime that maybe wasn't expected when I first saw it a long time ago, that I wasn't really aware of until recently. But I mean, that's a good point. Yeah. Bato is his appearance is, you know, definitely, asking that question, I think, of the viewer, of like, because we don't really have much of his background from the anime, at least, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe I don't remember it, and I haven't read the manga, but you know, origin is a big point, where we came from, you know, who we are, how do we know who we are, how do we know what we are, is a big question that this story asks. And I think it's interesting that it maybe represents itself through appearance, you know, throughout the movie and the anime.
That's a very good point. Appearance is a big part of Ghost in the Shell. And of course, we've been through who the Japanese think they are as a people, and they're very conscious of their history. And there's things that they want to know about where they came from, and there's things that they don't want to know about where they came from. And on the appearance side, probably the third or fourth time I watched it, when Johansson disappears and she's using this bodysuit to reflect the background behind her so that she can disappear. And then she suddenly reappears, and it's this very striking female form that I think we're all familiar with because we've seen every film that she's done the past 10 years. Mm-hmm. She's extremely feminized, and it's almost like not just the film, not just the director, but she is saying, sometimes you want to see me and sometimes you don't. And when you do see me, I want to choose as a woman when you see me and when you don't. And Miss Johansson, unfortunately, has been the victim of a lot of these photograph leaks that have been going around. And I found that part of the film very empowering, where she had very specific say in the film about how they revealed her body and how it was displayed. I don't know that that's true of a lot of women in Hollywood. And I wish it were true all of the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, the supermodel Emily Ratajkowski, who I know nothing about, just released a book last week called The Body. Yeah. About she discussed these various topics, and she went on to The Guardian and did an hour-long interview on The Guardian on the podcast. And I was entranced by everything that she had to say. I agreed with probably all of it. I just thought it was amazing. Someone else takes a picture of me, and yet they have control over the image of my body. How is that possible?
Yeah.
Right. It's very strange. So, you know, Michaela Maroney is underage, takes self-shots of herself. They get leaked out. She goes to the court. She can get those images removed, and she has power of those images because she took those photos. Some of these people who took these photos, they don't know their names. Or in Miss Lawrence's case, Jennifer Lawrence, it was like a boyfriend she didn't talk to anymore. He's not interested in providing the legal force to get those images removed. How is it that someone else has purpose over you? This goes back to an interview on a podcast that Carrie Fisher did with Kevin Smith. This was 15 years ago when Smodcast was just starting. She does not have control over her image as Princess Leia. Mm-hmm. She signed that away in 1976. And so the slave girl outfit has grown into this phenomenon that you see in conventions every summer. And she never got a penny out of it, right? That exploitive nature of the side of entertainment, eventually it's going to have to be dealt with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this conversation makes me really excited to read and watch Ghost in the Shell. I feel so terrible that I just didn't didn't have time, but now I'm really excited.
Yeah. It also exposes the lopsided nature of our relationship with Ryan, that he's watched everything we've recommended to him, and we have not watched the one thing he's recommended to us. So we're great friends.
You guys will love it. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, I don't want to say anything that will spoil it for you, but it really is. It's fun, and it is, you know, a very mentally stimulating narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Love that.
Get ready for subs, because like 15% of it is in Japanese.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I have to watch. You have to watch it with subtitles. I mean, I watch everything with subtitles. I'm one of those people because I don't want to miss anything in dialogue. Yeah, it's just, and it's so cool. It's just such a cool movie. I mean, you know, I don't want to be, you know, basic and expressing my emotion over the film, but it is just really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you can, see the anime first.
Okay.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So Otomo went to the premiere of Akira and watched it, and he said he thought it was a failure. And then they told him it was a success the following Monday, and he was surprised. And then all the international deals came in, and he was really surprised of how popular it was overseas.
Mm-hmm.
And then he went to go see it in America, and he said the sound was different. And it made the film better. I found that surprising. Usually it's the reverse. He said that Akira was universal because it is an anti-establishment work, and that goes from culture to culture to culture. What is it about Akira that is anti-establishment? I mean, we know the biker gangs are, but what is it about Tetsuo that is anti-establishment? Any ideas?
I was doing deep thinking after my third viewing of it, and I had trouble articulating my thoughts last commentary, talking about the whole rebirth angle and whether or not that was positive or negative, that the city was rebirthed after this big tragedy. And, you know, obviously a tragedy is not positive, but I think it's anti-establishment because after the city has been rebuilt, it's still, you think that would lead to a new, better society, but instead, in spite of all of the progress they've made, the government, the people, the higher class have taken it for granted and grown selfish, and the socioeconomic gap is even wider than it presumably was before World War III. And so, yeah, the super wealthy are at the top, clinging to their money. The bottom are left to rot. And the only people really doing anything about it are these teenagers. They're the only people really rebelling. And you can kind of see as a viewer, you're like, okay, these are people, they're a little bit violent, rambunctious, but these are active members of the rebellion. They're like actually making a difference. And riots are rampant in the streets later on in the film, but it all comes down to Tetsuo, who's the one to finally make this new change, another rebirth, because society has grown so poor that you're gonna have to do this all over again. And so, yeah, I think you can see a lot of that teenage angst, but rebellion in the teenagers. Because, yeah, the city itself has become a black hole after the first black hole.
You have any thoughts, Ryan?
It's interesting. I think maybe if we specify establishment a little bit in terms of what Tetsuo is against, he's not just against, you know, what we take establishment to mean in terms of authority or mass acceptance of an idea and kind of the way everybody goes about things. I think if we take establishment to mean, what are these pockets of ideologies or pockets of, ways of life to which most people conform, we can kind of blow it out into different ideas of what establishment means. And that's whether it's government, whether it's religion, whether it's community. Tetsuo is anti all of that. If you look at it, he's in the manga. There's, Lady Miyako, who I kind of take to represent the church in this story. Then you have the military, and through the military, kind of this overarching governmental force. And then you have the other, kind of idea of community being his friend group. And it doesn't matter how you slice it. He's on this personal quest of power, and he's anti everything that gets in his way. And so he kind of represents this character that has decided to battle against anything that he recognizes as a threat in his quest to whatever it is, whether he's trying to go after this harnessing of this power for personal gain or for authoritarian use or for domination. He has a goal in mind, and anything, regardless of where it comes from, that tries to kind of impede him represents a battle he's got to fight or something he's got to push back against. So it's interesting that, we have, the dichotomy between, the capsules and the gangs and this kind of subculture, fighting against, the military and the government in this story. But we also have one character that's fighting against everything. So I think he's anti every establishment, not just specifically, the obvious kind of pitting of Tetsuo against, what the obvious display of force to the military or the government is. I want to dig deeper into that idea of Lady Miyako representing kind of the church and battling against, an individual's fight against religion. In a way, I haven't really thought about it too much, but I think it's an interesting point to kind of at least bring up on the surface.
Oh, you just wait another 20, 30 minutes when we get into the Bene Gesserit.
Oh.
Don't you invoke Dune. Don't you invoke Dune in front of me. This will be a 5-hour podcast.
Perfect. Yeah, Tetsuo's refusal to follow Canada, I looked it up. It's an affront to the Bozozuku. Their hierarchy is so rigid. And that was something that the Japanese audiences picked up on immediately, was his rebelling against Canada. That was rebelling against everything. If Canada had been in a Bozuko and he was not the captain, he would never have rebelled up. That's why he was so pissed off at Tetsuo. I'm the boss. You're supposed to pay attention to me, right? You ever seen Gung Ho? Gung Ho with Michael Keaton, Ron Howard, 1986, I think it is.
Yeah.
Michael Keaton plays this labor leader in this town, and it's kind of like Flint, Michigan, where the plant closed and everybody was out of work. And he went to Japan. It's a great Ron Howard film. It doesn't get any mileage today, and I don't know why. He goes to Japan, and he gets this Japanese company to come make cars in this town in Ohio that's dead. And it's crazy. Like George Wendt is in it. Jesus from John Turturro, Jesus from Big Lebowski's in it. There are all these car workers. There's like on the face racism going on, and embedded in their belief is you work for us, and we're asking you to make cars this way. Why are you arguing? There's no arguing. This is the way things are done. And the Americans are like, well, actually, we're a union, and we have a say on how things are done in America, especially in this plant in Ohio. It's very much the same type of mentality between Canada and Tetsuo.
Yeah, I think that this conversation really points out a major departure from the manga, because Tetsuo and Canada are not as sympathetic as they are in the anime. And there's I guess the rivalry is more aggressive. And I didn't necessarily pick up why Canada was so aggressive toward Tetsuo in the beginning, because I was like, yeah, sure. Like they were kind of from the same group. So why did he have such a visceral reaction to when Tetsuo started gaining power? But that does make a lot of sense, because he's the one who is teasing Tetsuo about like, oh, your bike is a piece of shit. You can't ride the way I can ride. Like, you have to sort of make your bones before I take you seriously. And I kind of got that from the Tetsuo side of like why he would want to rebel. But now I more understand why Canada is more like, hey, fuck you. Like, you can't gain more power than me. That comes across more in the manga. Whereas in the anime, he wants to save Tetsuo. So that's actually quite a departure from the manga.
And one thing that I found about the anime is there's a Japanese nuance using Roman-ji. When they face off for the first time, Tetsuo calls Canada Kenji-shan, which is a diminutive term for children, calling a superior.
Oh.
This is an insult of great magnitude in Japanese culture. This is kind of like I don't know if you guys saw Squid Game.
Oh yeah.
There's a big subs versus dubs argument going on in Squid Game because it's missing all kinds of shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I had no idea. How do you pick up on stuff like that? So, also in Japan, to leave a clan for another clan, regardless of group or society, is an unforgivable transgression. As Tetsuo left for the clowns, and reverse, he did so with shame. And the fact that actually, when you read it in the manga and you see it in the anime, Tetsuo had no shame. No shame at all. And that was absolutely to Canada, that was unforgivable. I mean, if you're going to do something like that, don't do something like that. But if you're going to do it with shame. Tetsuo had no shame.
Right. Yeah, you can definitely feel the Shakespearean Game of Thrones nature of all these pockets of the city, and how it's universal that what Tetsuo leaving his gang means to Kaneda, and you understand even more so in the anime because it's quicker, the impact of that decision for sure.
Let's talk about Tetsuo the Creep. And I'm going to jump into some of the stuff that's going on in Stephen King's works later. But in the book, in the fifth tankobon, Tetsuo is using a member of the Empire to lure young girls to Akira's palace. Then he plies them with drugs, in which they eventually will OD and die. And then he hosts an orgy. And this is done page by page for about 3 different pages, in which you see the orgy take place and the girls OD. And the only survivor out of one of these orgies is Corey.
Yeah.
Yeah. That wasn't in the anime.
No.
And
probably for the best.
In the book, in the book, I was right. I was understanding Tetsuo up to that point, and then to me that was the threshold. After that, I was like, this guy is shit, and I'm not a Tetsuo fan anymore. And I think that's another aspect of Akira that's lost. At some point in time, at no point in time during the film, do you think, this Tetsuo guy, he just has a different point of view. He's just a villain like any other villain. But if you'd had something like that groundbreaking in the film, which I think it's obvious why they didn't put it in the film, I think your audience reaction would be very different at the end when Canada is the victor. It's almost knowing that, reading the tankobons, you're kind of you're very relieved at the end when Kaneda is the victor. But watching the film, it's not that you don't care. That's how the way things are going to work, but it's less of an impact. Ryan is studiously looking at his tankobon.
Well, I'm trying to refresh because I remembered that. You brought it up again. I just had forgotten of that part, probably on purpose. So, but yeah, it kind of came back, and yeah, it's not super. It's not enjoyable or fun at all.
No, it's completely misogynistic. Nobody wants to really think about it or talk about it or dwell on it. I certainly don't, right? But it is one of those elements that's missing out of Akira, and that does affect your judgment on Tetsuo by the end of the book. And it also has a second result, which is he's very specifically focusing after that event to abandon the flesh in order to transcend reality. And it's like abandoning the flesh doesn't mean anything unless he indulges in the flesh, right? So it's Otomo's doing something very specific there, because you could just look at it and reading like, what is this bullshit going on? But Otomo, like a lot of things, he's doing it on purpose. He's putting Tetsuo through that experience so that he can leave that experience. And I think that's something that's very adult. You're in that first relationship, that first sexual relationship. You're having a whole lot of fun for 6 months or a year. Or if you're not, you're playing the field. If you're one of these people who does that over and over and over again with different people, and eventually you come out the other side and you're a different person because you realize that stuff really actually doesn't really matter as much as we thought.
Yeah.
What matters is finding someone that has stability, finding someone that I can spend the rest of my life with, that can be a companion, right? For 12 decades, not 12 hours. And I think that's Tetsuo's own journey that Otomo is trying to describe. But I could be wrong.
Yeah, we could all be wrong in our interpretations, but yeah, gosh, that's pretty dark. That's something that is interesting about the manga, is it just doesn't look away from a lot of stuff like that. And like you said, I think sometimes my taste in movies and books is hard to define, because I don't mind dark stuff as long as there's a background for it, or as long as there's a purpose for it. I have a lot of problems personally with, just unnecessary gore or horror or terror or violence. But that kind of thing, if it has a purpose and it's saying something important about identity, especially for Tetsuo, I understand why it's there. It's tough to look at, but I think it's interesting that Otomo is diving into it.
Sure. Yeah. If there's no point to it.
Yeah.
Right. So it's funny because Tetsuo has all of these flaws as a human being. And as a superhero, taking those flaws, it just expounds the flaws. It just makes everything worse. To be a bad person is horrible. To be a superhero and a bad person.
Yeah.
It reminds me of this really funny joke that Robin Williams told a long time ago, which was, or I think it was Bill Cosby, actually, the person we're not supposed to mention anymore, which is he asked a friend of his, why do you like cocaine? And they said, well, it enhances your personality. And Bill Cosby's joke was, yeah, but what if you're an asshole?
No, we had that discussion when we were covering Watchmen, because we talked about how in a lot of ways the flawed superheroes are a lot like Greek gods, because the Greek gods, they were deities who had, flaws that were blown out of proportion. And we talked a lot about how coming into contact with humans is that interplay is really interesting, and humans are always trying to better themselves or hopefully better themselves. But these deities don't really have that that impetus, because in a lot of ways they're immortal. And so when you're immortal, like what's going to keep you interested? And a lot of times for Greek gods, it was just meddling in human affairs. And with Watchmen, it's really interesting to see those questions applied to justice, criminal justice, and how that can twist people's sense of justice and affect how they treat other people if other people don't live up to that definition of justice. And so we kind of dug into that with Rorschach, which is exactly that. Like, he has this personal code of justice, and if people don't, live up to that, then he punishes them. And that's not necessarily moral, but to him it was moral. So yeah, with Tetsuo, I think it's a lot of that is just like he's trying to figure out what this power means to him and what he can do with that power. And I don't think he completely comes into that because he dies. So I guess maybe that's just another way of looking at, being careful with your power and stuff like that. But yeah, those are really interesting things to think about.
Yeah. And in an even broader sense, Tetsuo is a representation of humanity's immaturity once receiving power, because Akira is very much focused on Japan's past, but it's universal because, at least to Americans, because as soon as America gained the atomic bomb, immediately used it. As soon as other countries gained the atomic bomb, immediately Cold War. And it goes to Tetsuo, especially in the movie, but there's not even a beat once he gains his powers. He's immediately abusing it. Yeah. And it does have that connection to like Greek mythology. Like, he is Hades, like he is representing a certain people. He's fallen from the heavens, and he's as bad as the people he's supposedly protecting or ruling over.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about different countries and the way that they handle power, because we were talking about with Japan has been in a lot of situations where they've had a lot of power, and in a lot of situations where they haven't had a lot of power. And in America, it's a very different conversation, because America is a very aggressive country, but it's because I feel like we've been in such a socioeconomic place of power for so long that we're very afraid to lose that power. So it's like a lot of times I feel like Americans don't have that interplay. Like, we don't have that understanding, especially in living memory, probably since the American Revolution, of not being on top and not being a controlled entity. So if you think about that with different communities, then you're going to get very different reactions, I guess, to receiving that power.
Sure. Well, what I used to tell my students when we talked about it was nobody liked Rome. Nobody liked Rome. Everybody, you read any history of any country, any people that was conquered by Rome or bordered Rome, they hated Romans. Yeah. And that's what we are. We're Rome. We're a republic, and we're on top for now. Yeah. And trying to come to terms with the fact that we're not going to be on top. Like, that's going to be very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
I'm experiencing that now as a Patriots fan. I was on top for years, and now not so. I saw that, Ryan. He did the thumbs down, listeners, and he did 2 thumbs down. That's it. You're canceled.
That's all right. I went to 2 games of the World Series.
Nice.
And I watched my beloved Astros fuck it all up.
Yeah.
Thanks.
That's all right. And so Tetsuo, I want to get back to the Watchmen. I want to cap this off. Tetsuo thinks that his ultimate flaw is weakness. If you read the manga or you watch the anime, he's constantly worried about, I'm a weak person and I have to show myself up. He's got this huge chip on his shoulder. The entire time he's wrong. His greatest flaw is not weakness. His greatest flaw is pride.
Yeah.
And that's what gets him into all of these problems, is his pride. Can't swallow his pride for shit. That's really something very difficult to deal with when you've got a friend with that problem, particularly if it's a substance abuse problem. Oh, pride will fuck them up. Bad, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then once again, that ties into the metaphor of countries with power. They much more go to pride over apologizing and trying to make something better. It's like, no, we're going to stick by our guns.
Stick by the story.
Literally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. And what you're saying about The Watchmen, I know it's a completely different narrative arc than Akira. But the notion of these superheroes that are flawed and were more like Greek gods, that was something that Alan Moore did that was very original.
Yeah.
You know, or when Alan Moore did The Dark Knight, or Frank Miller did, and as Batman, he was killing people. That turned a lot of heads.
Mm-hmm.
And it led to a completely different narrative environment that Warner Brothers is still trying to get on top of today. I love The Watchmen. We'll have to belay that for now.
Okay, yeah. We could talk about Watchmen for
that'll be another 4 hours. Yeah. Otomo's epic work divided the world of manga into a before and after, with Akira seen as a fundamental break in the history of the medium, both artistically and culturally. Mm-hmm. I think that this is true. Even if you look at the Ghibli before and the Ghibli after, it looks different. It flows differently. Don't you think, Ryan?
Could you refresh me on Ghibli?
Studio Ghibli, exactly? You know, like if you look at any of the Ghibli films before, and they're a direct competitor to Otomo and the dark nature of anime, right? Ghibli is flowery, youthful, hippy-dippy stuff, and Otomo's side of anime is very blunt, forced trauma type of stuff. But you can still see the flow of the anime itself, the higher frames per second, for example, and just generally the quality of what you see in Ghibli improves after. There's no Ghost in the Shell if there's no Akira.
Exactly. I was just about to say that. I think it absolutely set a precedent that, you know, people, viewers, audiences loved and came to adore and was accepted as the benchmark from that point going on. And I think, you know, you beat me to the punch. Without Akira, there's no Ghost in the Shell, and, you know, at all, or any films or you know, adaptations post Akira that are relevant or similar in terms of style, in terms of depiction of certain things, whether it's violence or sexuality. It's a landmark. And definitely a benchmark going forward.
Okay, time for a segue. Before Akira, Otomo did a short film called Domo that was based on one of his graphic novels. Domo, actually, Otomo said, was inspired by The Shining. And you guys did an episode on The Shining.
Yes, we did.
Which I listened to, and I found infinitely entertaining.
Oh, thank you. That's such high praise, Dylan. That means a lot.
So now I want to get into Stephen King, since The Shining inspired Domo.
Let's do it. I'm reveling already. I'm ready to talk about King.
Mixed with, and Ryan walks away.
He's out.
And we're going to mix this a lot with Dr. Sleep.
We just covered Dr. Sleep, so perfect.
Yeah, I listened to that too. That was another great episode. So where do we even start with this? So I read The Shining when I was, I don't know, in middle school or something, and I was quite surprised because I had already seen the film. The book is so different than the film, and effectively it's about a drinking problem.
Yeah.
And I had to read the book again in college, and I don't know how I feel about this, but I'm of the opinion, since I read it for the second time, I read it for a literature class in college, that there's nothing supernatural going on in the book.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is I think that it's largely from Jack Torrance's perspective, and there's a lot of delusion going on. There's a lot of hallucination going on. He's freaking out at the rose bushes, and none of this is in the film. Which so it's almost like it takes it out of context. It's like Kubrick is only showing you these very selective scenes to make you think in a certain way. But then I watched the film again with my son when he first saw it a couple of years ago. And then, of course, I watched that documentary, Room 237. I don't know if you've seen that.
I've seen that, yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty good. And the one thing that really shocked me that kind of reinforced that belief was there's only one thing in the film, one thing that is truly supernatural in the film. And that is when Jack Torrance is in the pantry and the door mysteriously unlocks. Mm-hmm. That's the only thing in everything else you can chalk up to the drinking or some sort of hallucination, induced or non-induced, or just going stir crazy. And even that may not be supernatural if you take into account that perhaps, maybe, if you give it a little bit of credence, and maybe this is not possible, maybe Danny opened the pantry.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I never thought of that.
Because you don't see Danny for a very long time after that shot. And that had me thinking about how brave it was for King to dive into Dr. Sleep and the entire controversy about that. I thought your episode brought up a lot of really good points on Dr. Sleep that I hadn't thought about. And I read it when it came out, and then I listened to the audiobook just very recently.
Okay.
And I really forgot just the melding of the characters and how different characters are gone and then other characters are combined. And I too was amazed at how close the finale was just over like that in the book. Was really, that took me by surprise, but I thought the film did a very good job of just making the finale longer and more meaningful.
Yeah. Yeah. And how sacrificing characters upped the stakes a little bit, because I thought a lot of characters were going to die. I thought that they were going to go back to the Shining book where Jack sacrifices himself for Danny. I thought the same thing was going to happen with Danny for Abra. Mm-hmm. And I think the movie did a really smart thing by pulling that off. I'm not sure why King decided not to do that, but that's what I was expecting. And I'm glad that the movie did that.
Yeah. Cause it is strange, because the True Knot in the book are very scary and they are a threat. But as soon as they start fighting Abra and Danny, they lose every single time, including the ending, which is why I was so disappointed with it. I was, like I said in that episode, it was going to be one of my favorite books of all time until that. It didn't feel like the same writer. So the movie definitely capitalized on that. Well,
and not to get too deep into it, but Stephen King writes differently after his accident. It's almost like before he was run over and after he was run over. There's some people that will completely disagree with that. That's fine. But 11/22/63 was written after that, for example. And that book does not read
very different
like
book
King at all. Right?
Yeah.
Great book and great series.
Yeah. On
Hulu. No, I agree with that. And, the Torrance family line is tortured. And I really, at first, when I first read Dr. Sleep, I was upset that he was going down the same road that Danny had this drinking problem too. And as someone who has people in their family that fight substance abuse, it's not something that I want to read or watch. I remember going to see a Robert Zemeckis film with Denzel Washington, and it's about a drug addict who has a drinking problem. And it's a great movie. It's fine. It's called Flight. But that's not the movie that I wanted to go see. I wanted to go see Back to the Future, and I wound up, watching a 2-hour movie about recovery. And
yeah, that movie was very much marketed as a plane crash diversion movie, and it's not that at all. That's just the opening scene, from what I recall.
Well, they learned that way back in, I think it was 89. It was right after Batman. Michael Keaton did a movie called Clean and Sober, where he played a guy with a drinking problem and a cocaine problem. And, they marketed, the movie's called Clean and Sober. Come and watch Michael Keaton fight with a sobriety. Nobody wanted to go see that.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. Not interested. Batman with a drinking problem?
Yeah.
No.
A great movie about alcoholism that came out recently, which I recommend, is called The Way Back with Ben Affleck. Played a basketball coach at a high school. That, I think the marketing was very true to the story of that. It's only half a basketball story. It's really focused on him. It's a character study. So I would definitely recommend that movie.
That's the last movie I saw before lockdown ended. I was in a movie theater Friday the 13th of March, which I think was the day of the governor's announcement.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yes, it was.
I went when I was in Encino or Calabasas. Went to a theater out there.
Nice.
And great movie theater, and there was nobody there. There's nobody there. And I think. Well, no. The next day, my son and I went to go see Harry Potter: Deathly Hallows Part 1 at the New Beverly.
Oh, that's fun.
Very cool.
On film. Yeah. And then that was the last day they were open until they just reopened a few months ago.
Wow. Yeah. We have a kind of similar story. We went to a Tame Impala show at the Forum. And we started getting, like, as we're walking in, we started getting updates that Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson, is that his wife?
That's right.
They had gotten COVID. And then as we're walking out of the show, like 2 hours later, it's like NBA shuts down. Started getting all these, and we're like, we should probably get out of this, like, 50,000.
Yeah, we were going to see Tame, but then we were going to
then we were going to shut it down.
Yeah.
But anyway, back to Stephen King.
Yeah. Well, has he done any book on viruses? I'm trying to think.
Hey, he did.
Cujo's kind of about
The Stand. The Stand is about a virus,
right? And he did. Didn't he do Cell or like the computer virus that goes on everyone's phones, and then all technology is destroyed?
I don't remember that.
Familiar? No.
I think so. Cell.
Yeah, that's cool.
I'll look that up while you're talking. But yeah,
interesting. Yeah. So going to It, which was recently remade into It Chapter 1, It Chapter 2. I got into an argument with a friend of mine on a podcast, actually, over It. I read It when I was 12 or 13. It was before the miniseries came out, which was horrible, and I hated it. And so you guys read It?
No,
long time ago.
Okay, so they survived. Did you see It Chapter 1, Chapter 2? I don't want to do spoilers. I'll skip this if I have to.
I've seen it.
Yeah.
Okay, the two of you have seen it. So I guess, Laura, do you want to?
You can spoil, because I know enough about It that I know, like, what's in the book versus what's not in the book and stuff. So go ahead.
The kids win.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the kids win. But in the book, the enormous page turner that happened after they had survived this enormous calamity. And by the way, like if you had read the finale in the book, it was a page turning, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And it was just getting worse and worse and worse. And you thought they were never going to get it out of the situation alive. And then they did. So the last chapter was this relief as a reader that it was all over. And then it was a page turner just trying to get to the end of the book because he wanted to make sure that everybody was, what they had gone on and done. In all of that, I think there's a page and a half in which King describes this preteen orgy that happens right outside the cave. Mm-hmm. And it's a celebratory moment between all of them, that they can live now, that they can go on. And they're all like 13, 12 or 13. The book came out, and needless to say, that was an enormous drawback to the publicity. It was people getting to the end of the book and then immediately saying, I can't believe that King wrote this underage orgy at the end of the book. The child killing they were okay with.
Right. Yeah.
So that to me is another thing that I just don't understand about how we look at literature and about how we look at film. Mm-hmm. There's this great documentary called This Film Has Not Yet Been Rated, talks about the rating system. And the director of Boys Don't Cry, very, very talented filmmaker. This is one of the things that I don't understand about American society. And if you had been in the Middle East, and I've been in the Middle East a couple of times, and if you had watched Al Jazeera during the Iraq War, you would have a greater appreciation for how other people look at their media. Al Jazeera does not give a shit. They will play the most violent things in the world. They will play beheadings live, and they will show unbelievable things that you will not see in the West, and they will leave it up to whatever country they are broadcasting to edit them out. We have a self-censored structure in the United States when it comes to film. We have no structure when it comes to literature, which is how it should be, in my opinion. And the MPAA, they did a documentary on it called This Film Has Not Yet Been Rated. And Kimberly Pierce was on it talking about her experience trying to rate Boys Don't Cry. The rating process for Boys Don't Cry was a complete travesty. And they came back and said, you can't show this shot of Hilary Swank's genitalia. We just can't have it on screen. And then we can't have this love scene between her and I want to say that it was Chloe Sevigny. Yeah, I was correct. There was a love scene between her and Chloe Sevigny. You can't have that because there's female fluid on the top of Hilary Swank's lip after the sex scene, and she wipes it off, and we can't have that. Oh, but shooting Hilary Swank in the head and have her brains fly over the wall, that's fine. Mm. We have no problem with murdering a female.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But we can't show that a female is a female.
Right.
That's bad. I mean, I find that really misogynistic. And the fact that they told a female director what she could and could not have in her film in regards to a female image, that's disgusting. And I don't care how many females are sitting on the board at the MPAA. And so if there's anything that made me think that the MPAA needs to go away, it was that documentary. There's either that or we have to find some sort of replacement.
Yeah.
I mean, this is crazy. Like Trey Parker and Matt Stone talking about Team America World Police, about how you should have seen the stuff that that didn't make the film because they were deliberately putting in scatology, hoping that these other things that were really perverted and funny would pass through.
Right.
Right. So if we just push the fold, then what we really wanted in the film would be, and we actually didn't want that stuff in the film at all. We may cut it out later. We want to see what passes the ratings. That's a messed up way to do your art.
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit when we covered The Handmaiden, which is a movie that both Danny and I really, really love, and how there are a lot of very explicit sex scenes in the movie, but the way that they're done is very respectful. And then, of course, you can very directly compare that to Blue is the Warmest Color movie, which is extremely sexualized and was directed by a man. And neither of those movies are rated in America. But it's just interesting that they tried to express the same thing, and Blue is the Warmest Color failed in a really big way because it just wasn't treated the same as The Handmaiden. And I think like if there was a lot more respect and a lot more understanding and a lot more, I guess, respect for the female body and female experiences, then those kinds of things could be rated in a mature way. I think that's what it kind of gets to, is like, we're all adults. If we know that there's explicit content, but it's respectful and it has a meaning, like there's a meaning behind it, then that can be rated and that can be appropriate in movies. But if you're taking meaning out by censoring something like a sex scene, then that's not really serving the movie or the TV show.
Thank you for the greatest segue possible.
Okay. I knew that you wanted to talk about Blue is the Warmest Color.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I didn't know that it was based on a book, and I found your description of the book really compelling, and I had no idea that even as a source material that the film would be just so different.
Yeah.
Unbelievably different. And, when it came out and it hit Cannes and Léa Seydoux was at the top of the world, or at least outside the United States, she was at the top of the world. I had heard about it and then it hit Netflix and I watched it late at night. Actually, I was in bed with my kids. My kids were, I don't know, 12 and 10 or something or 9. And I was watching it on my phone and I thought like, wow, this, for the first 30 minutes, I was really amazed at the setup and the raw emotion of everything. The female leads in that, Adele Exarchopoulos, or however you pronounce your name, I'm sorry. They seem to just have this great chemistry on screen that is really rare. First of all, most films, like we were talking about before, fail the Bechdel test. You don't have two female leads. You don't have them talking about a situation in which a guy is not involved like this. So it was rather refreshing seeing that. I didn't catch, you're going to have to forgive me, I didn't catch how misogynistic it was the first time I watched it, because it fools you. Because it shows you emotions that are so raw and you're so wrapped up in the performances, you kind of skip over the art/porn that's going on.
Yeah. And
I mean, that film will never be rated in the United States. There's no reason for them to take it to a ratings board. It'll never pass a censor and it'll never be released in cinemas. It did hearken me. I was at some aspect, I was like, why is this so controversial? I was kind of thinking that, like, I don't understand why controversial it was. And then I saw the love scene, the first one, and I didn't know there was a second one. So the second one's even more explicit. And it reminded me of Showgirls. Showgirls comes out. Joe Esterhazy does the script. Verhoeven is directing it. Who is not going to go see this film after Total Recall and Lost Boys and Basic Instinct? Everybody's going to go see this movie. I went to see the movie. It was complete dog shit. And a lot of people were wondering, like, well, what's the big deal? I don't understand the big deal. Well, I saw it in a screen that had a 70 millimeter screen. There's that one shot after the joke of a lap dance that Elizabeth Berkley gives to Kyle MacLachlan, which I can't believe I just used those two actors in the same sentence. She stands up, she walks towards the camera, and her genitalia is 6 feet tall on a 70 millimeter screen. That is why that film is rated in NC-17. For that one reason. There was no other reason. Boobs are boobs are boobs are boobs. The movie is filled with boobs.
Right.
So it's very clearly that the board, the ratings board, does not like female genitalia. They don't want to see it ever. And to think that there is somebody telling you what you cannot and can't see, and to think that there's a company in France that says, yeah, we won't release this in America because it'll never be rated to a point where we can make a profit. So we're not even going to do it. You know what we're going to do? We're going to cut our losses. We're going to make a deal with Netflix. And then Blue, the Warmest Color is going to be the number one thing seen on Netflix for a month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, that's the best we can do with our art. That's disappointing. Really. It's disappointing how Kashish chose to shoot those images. Because I do think that they're disrespectful. Once you get past that, you know, once again, I get enwrapped into the performances. I just think those two actresses were over the moon fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, I completely agree. I wish that if we did have a censorship board like the MPAA that could see past the images and more of like what the images are trying to say, then maybe some of that could have been censored out, or someone, maybe a gay female on the censorship board would say, like, this is disrespectful to images of women having sex on screen. So maybe these images get cut out. But the way that those two women are acting as young lovers is beautiful, then maybe we would have a more respectful movie. I don't know. Like, it's something to think about, because as much as I don't agree with like total censorship, I think if we had people in positions of power who could say, like, this serves the overall experience of the movie, let's keep it in, even though it's a little explicit, that would be a better situation.
It's not that difficult to have diversity. It really isn't. You just find the most talented people. There's a Rushmore of them, and then you pick out people who are diverse. I don't get that's the one thing. If you're going to list everything Ann Coulter has said in the last 30 years, I would basically refuse to read any of it. But one thing that she did say was, if you had more conservatives at ABC, CBS, and NBC over a 6-year period, there would be no Fox News. Mm-hmm. And it's absolutely true.
Interesting. Yeah. Never thought of it that way.
And I'm not trying to neuter a pool of diverse talent in some sort of maelstrom force. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to say it belongs everywhere.
Yeah.
And it belongs on the ratings board. And it's very clear that when you see the idea that blue is the warmest color is not even released in cinemas in America, that's crazy. Mm-hmm. And it's directly because, like you said, it wouldn't pass to the ratings board. Maybe if they had more diverse ratings board, it would have been released. So, are we just going to get into the Bene Gesserit now?
Oh, hell
it's your
yes.
podcast. We're just guests.
I thought you'd never
take us
away.
I see Ryan having this sort of Bruce Willis-like smirk here.
I'm just waiting.
Ryan, have you read the book by chance?
I was before the audio got hooked up. I was explaining to Dan and Laura that I tried to get it done before I watched the movie. I'd read it as a kid, so I knew I was going to reread it regardless and rewatch it again to put the connections together. But it's been a long time since I read the book. But I could not have been happier with the film. I'm a huge Denis Villeneuve fan. Blade Runner 2049 probably will pop up in a Rushmore question later, but it was astounding.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Danny?
I loved it as well, and I reread the book right before the movie, and we're going to do an episode on it as well, but it is my favorite book, so spoiler alert for Rushmore. I worship Denis Villeneuve. You probably know that from listening to my podcast. I can't stop talking about man, but he's everything he's done has blown me away.
All right, I have the 25th anniversary edition of Dune, published in September of 1990.
Nice.
Beautiful.
The copy that I originally read. And this goes into my theory on the remake. This is the first, after Princess Irulan's message, which is almost the beginning of every chapter. The first paragraph says, in the week before their departure to Arrakis, when all the final scurrying about had reached a nearly unbearable frenzy, an old crone came to visit the mother of the boy, Paul. It's the first thing they say. I'm one of those people that I don't like to know what movies are about. If I think it's got a really cool concept, then I will just run into it not knowing anything. And sometimes I get surprised, and I find the majority of the time I'm better off for it. About 48 hours before I went, my friend Dave Anderson texted me, and we started talking about when we were going to go see it. We wanted to see it in the theater. And that's when I said, yeah, and I looked at the runtime, and the runtime is 15 minutes shy of the first film. So I don't know how he's going to pull that off. And that's when Dave texted you back, and he said, no, dude, it's only part one.
Yeah.
And I nearly shit my pants.
Yeah.
Then the texting really got into a frenzy. Well, when is it going to end? Like what scene? He's like, I don't know. You go see it. So there seems to me to be some very interesting choices going on with the film. The film is a success. They greenlit chapter 2 like 2 days after the weekend was over, so Tuesday.
Yeah.
And I'm very happy to see it. I don't want to trash the movie at all. I did not find it nearly as compelling as a lot of people. I do love the first hour. I've got some problems with it, and I wanted to work through this trauma with the three of you, and hopefully I can convey a sense of adoration, and I'm not looking to change your opinion, but maybe you can talk me out of my reservations. Have you seen Othello, 1952 by Orson Welles?
No.
Okay.
I've only seen the Lawrence Fishburne one.
Right. So that one is really close to the play.
Cool.
And I think that's only missing like 15 or 20% of the dialogue. The one from 1952 is missing like 80% of the dialogue. And it's very stylistic. A lot of it is because sometimes Orson couldn't afford a sound recorder, so he was just filming stuff in black and white, and I'll just worry about how to incorporate the sound later. And that film was largely made in the editing room. He shot 4 times more than he needed, blah, blah, blah. He went through 4 Desdemonas before he found the one that worked. It was problem after problem after problem. But 80% of the dialogue of that play is jettisoned in the film. And he only focuses on one theme, obsession. And he hits it hard. So in Shakespeare, if it's not about obsession, he threw it out the window. He didn't bother with any of these other subplots. He didn't, I don't know how many scenes. There's 5 acts. There's about 5 to 10 scenes in each act. And it's a 2-hour movie, which is hard for any Shakespeare tragedy. Just reading this first paragraph, it seems very clear to me that Villeneuve, right? Am I pronouncing it right? Villeneuve. Okay. It seems very clear to me that Villeneuve had one focus for this film, and that is Paul. And if it didn't have anything to do with Paul, it was going out the window. So my wife, who was not a Dune fan, and she did like the film, but she was very curious about this Dr. Yui character.
Yeah.
And why he shows up and why he does the things that he does. And not that it wasn't explained, but I just didn't get it. In the first film, Yui is standing next to you for the first 20 minutes. And there's narration, there's voiceover, there's introduction, there's dialogue that enforces to you Yui. Now, in the book, Yui is revealed as a traitor from the get-go.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
The traitor Yui is how he's introduced.
Yeah.
And in the film, there's a scene with the Baron Harkonnen and Fade Routha and the Beast Raban. And Fade says, we want to know who the traitor is. And Harkonnen and Baron saying, no, I'm not going to tell you. And when you find out that it's Dean Stockwell, of all people, everyone is just really surprised. If you didn't read the book, it was the idea that Yui could do something like that. It really took people by surprise. I did not have that impact in this film, and neither did my wife. She was just confused. What did you guys think?
Yeah, I think that's the one thing that Danny has criticized.
It's tough to defend movies you love because your emotion overrides a lot of talking points. But yeah, that is the one and only one, to be perfectly honest here. I'm laying my cards out. That's the one and only criticism I do have of the film, is that Dr. Yui is not developed enough for that reveal to have impact. However, my rebuttal, and this largely comes out of my love for the film, maybe I'm reaching here, but I don't think Denis was going for a big reveal, because earlier on he has that scene, which is kind of similar to the book, but it's largely revised, of that scene with the Reverend Mother talking to the Baron with Piter there. And I think that's where they have that big reveal where, okay, there's going to be a betrayal. I think that scene is meant to have some impact, because in that scene, 2 things are happening. One, you're realizing that the Bene Gesserit kind of has ulterior motives. You're told that, but now you're really seeing that in action of like, oh, the Reverend Mother, she's planning for House Atreides to fall. But you're also getting the reveal of, shit's going to go down now, and Paul and Jessica will be spared, but everyone else will die. So that's my very weak defense of that moment. I think a lot of scenes with Dr. Yui are on the cutting room floor because Warner Brothers, mandated a 2.5 hour film after Blade Runner 2049 failed financially because of its length, people have claimed, and I agree with that. So yeah, unfortunately, not enough development with Dr. Yui. It's the one thing where but at the same time, I must acknowledge that I wish there was more scenes.
Okay. Ryan, do you want to weigh in? Or do you want to pass?
Just maybe provide, my own, rudimentary, I guess, reaction to it. Dan and Laura are the experts here. So I'll, lean on them, but, I agree with that. When Yui was revealed as the traitor, it was more of a sadness for me because you barely are kind of exposed to what seemingly his loyalty or devotion to the family, being how he treats Paul before he goes into, the scene where he has to put his hand in the box. And his guidance. And it's just enough to where you kind of put him in the back of your mind as a good guy. And then when he's revealed, to be the traitor and why he chose to do what he did, it explains it. But it wasn't this, no way, oh shit moment. I can't believe it. It was just like, oh, come on, really? Like I was kind of like hoping, that he was going to be, something more than that. And this is coming from, someone who read the book a long time ago. That was a piece that I had forgotten. So it was, the fact that, I kind of didn't remember that from the book, whereas Dan and Laura were obviously well-versed, and to have similar reactions, I think is maybe a statement. It just, the reveal kind of fell flat, but I was more sad, than anything. It wasn't, the surprise wasn't really there. But again, that's kind of a superficial, I guess, reaction since I didn't reread the book beforehand, but that's just my take on it.
Laura?
Yeah, I have 3 points that I think, unfortunately, are a letdown of the movie about Dr. Yue. So the first one is that we don't get the scene, which is in the book, where he gives Paul a sort of prayer book. And that's a great scene in the book because it shows how devoted he is to Paul. And I think maybe Villeneuve had to replace or kind of, what's the word? Not converge. I think that scene with the scene where he's kind of killing Duke Leto and he's explaining like, I'll take your ring. I'm going to save your wife and child. So that scene does show his devotion, but I think another scene with Paul could have opened him up a little bit more. The other thing is that even after, this is like 3/4 of the way through the book, Paul and his mother, sorry, what's his mother's name?
Jessica.
Thank you. Paul and Jessica are now deep into Arrakis. Again, this is like 2/3 of the way into the movie, and we meet Gurney Halleck again. He's reintroduced. We think he's dead, but he's not. And he still thinks that Jessica's the one who betrayed the family, and he tries to kill Jessica. Spoilers, I guess. And that, I think that reminds the audience how left field Dr. Yue was as the traitor, which I think is really cool. That's a really interesting thing. Like, even as the audience, we know who it is, but the characters in the novel are still like mind blown. They're like, no way, that's the doctor. Like that couldn't happen. And it's the whole thing about he has this training, this kind of programming in his mind that would technically not let him betray the family.
The imperial conditioning, which Villeneuve didn't even bring up, but Lynch hammered quite hard.
Yeah, so that was the third thing that I wanted to talk about, was without introducing that imperial conditioning, we don't get the layer about how dark not only the Imperium is, but also the Harkonnens are, because the way that they were able to switch Dr. Yue was kind of by leveraging that pain that he felt from having his wife be a slave, Harkonnens. And they talked a little bit about how they like reconditioned him. And I think that's just another layer that we missed of Yue. Like the reason he betrayed the entire Atreides family was because he wanted to save his wife, who he knew there was a very good chance that she was already dead. And so he was kind of like, well, you know what? Like, you know, it is what it is. And I'm a piece of shit. Like he continuously says that to himself. Like, I know I'm a piece of shit. I'm doing this for my wife, who very well may be dead, but you know, this is the one thing that I can do to sort of get out of the situation. And then he's killed almost immediately after his betrayal, which I think is just really, it's a really great plot point. Yeah, it's a really great plot point about how he's just almost immediately dispatched by the Baron. And that was a good scene in the movie. However, I think it does feel a little bit rushed because we don't get those three pretty massive pieces of how unlikely it is that Yue was the traitor.
Yeah, I mean, all valid points. I think for me, just that Bible scene, and that was shot because I follow this Twitter account that shows some deleted scenes. I don't know how or images of deleted scenes. I don't know how they got their hands on them, but that was shot and was cut from the movie. They needed that for sure. But again, going back to me defending it, a huge strength of the film is how all these different people or classes of people are more or less explained through showing, not telling. I love the exposition in the film. Like the Mentats, never even mentioned in the movie, but you get.
I was about to bring that up.
That's another. That was
another thing that Lynch hammered pretty bad was the spice stains on the lips of the Mentats have to consume a specific amount of spice in order to keep continuing as Mentats, and why the Mentats are even there. The idea of the machine wars is not even
that's not touched
introduced,
at all.
Right? It's not touched on at all. And I mean, I like what was done as far as Thufir's eyes like rolling up while he's doing the computation. Yes. I thought that was brilliant. That was I
wanted
really
more of that
good.
Actually.
Yeah. But and really what I after you read the book, and mind you, the book was written in 1965. Thufir to me is just a stand-in for Robert McNamara. You know, McNamara used to sit in the war room in Pearl Harbor and go over war games in the U.S. Army Air Force on these bombers that they were sending to Japan, and trying to whittle down the number of bombers that were flying back because of the great distances. A lot of them said, well, I've got a cracked window. If I've got a cracked window right after I launch, then I'm not going. I'm turning back because I'm not going to make it 1,800 miles there and 1,800 miles back. Whereas, you know, if you're in a war room and if you're running war games, you don't give a shit about one plane. What you give a shit about is the 25,000 pounds of bombs that it's going to drop. Mm-hmm. You really don't care if that plane's going to make it back or not. You need those bombs to hit that target. And it's running those numbers. That was the same type of mindset that fought the war in Vietnam. We need a crossover point. We need a certain amount of dead every week before we hit a crossover point. It's going to happen sometime late in 1968. And then once we do that, the war will be all down. That's how they were managing that. And here we have this Mentat effectively doing the same thing. So I saw him as a stand-in for McNamara, and to be honest, he was just as successful as McNamara. You know, everything Thufir computated for turned out wrong.
Yeah.
And he was so obsessed with finding this traitor. It really shows you the emphasis on Yui. Mm-hmm. He was obsessed with finding this, you know, there's got to be a Harkonnen spy around here somewhere. There's got to be someone who's telling them something. And I don't even know at the end of the novel if Thufir is even aware that it was Yui, because Thufir is taken into captivity and he's working for the Harkonnens. on
That's a good
GD
question. Yeah, I just reread the book, and I honestly couldn't tell you if he figures that out.
There's eventually a scene when they're all, facing off against the Emperor and Fade, and where Rebecca and
Thufir's there.
have a moment. Yeah,
Okay.
they have a moment, and he realizes, but of course it's too late because he's not getting the antidote anymore, and eventually dies.
Yes. He doesn't make it to Dune Messiah.
Right. But just as a fan of it, I think if they got into certain areas, I think a lesser movie or other sci-fi movies really get bogged down with the exposition of explaining everything. And the reason, a big strength of the movie for me, even though Dr. Yui isn't quite developed, is full races, full pockets of people are explained, visual metaphors. So you get with both Piter and Thufir doing the eye thing. It's like, okay, they're computing. They're doing a request for their masters. So that's all implied there. Duncan Idaho's ferocity, as well as the Harkonnen's values, are completely explained in one scene when Duncan Idaho slaughters a whole battalion of Harkonnens, and then there's another band of Harkonnens by the Thopters who they abandon the Thopters because they don't want to face off against Duncan. So they're ruled by fear. So they have no loyalty to House Harkonnen, whereas Atreides is the complete opposite. You get exactly their values just by whenever, one chants Atreides, everyone joins in. Whenever someone approaches Duke Leto, the guards, they're blade ready, I guess, like trigger happy to defend him. Like when Liet Kynes comes, you have these little moments throughout the movie where I think, gosh, they just condensed 10 pages in a second. So that's why I think that's what makes up for Dr. Yui, in my opinion.
And that was something that Lynch was not capable of doing.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, to be honest, and the 2-hour version is cut to pieces.
Yeah. Actually,
I don't like the 2-hour version because it's so truncated. Every scene is truncated because they're just trying to smush. It's one of the glories of The Abyss by James Cameron is he drops the entire third act and he just ends on the second act. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the director's cut of The Abyss, it goes on for another half hour, I think it is. And it makes a whole lot more sense that, Cameron wasn't going to sacrifice scenes for the whole film. And I think that's what was going on. And why Lynch took his name off the 3-hour version is befuddling to me. He could have had a much more influential role if he had worked with De Laurentiis in creating the 3-hour version. And I know that he had problems with the opening message from the Princess of Rulon, which I think is great. But he also had problems with the artistry of we're just going to sketch out images of the throne room and just show those images and have voiceover. There was obviously a better way to do that. I think it would have been better if you just asked Lynch to do that or asked Lynch to be involved. I know that after that experience, he was not very interested in doing anything with Dune. Mm-hmm. But it would have served him and his product and his art and his vision better if he had been involved. So a couple of other notes. Casting. I generally like the cast. I've got problems with Stellan Skarsgård as the Baron. It's not that he doesn't look lecherous, but yeah, I had a problem with that. The other thing was I'm willing to reserve judgment until I see part 2, but I was not impressed with Zendaya. Does anyone know why she's famous?
She was a Disney star and a singer, as well as a actress, and yeah. Okay.
It seems to me, and again, I know this was shot a long time ago, and we're dealing with a delayed industry, but it seems to me that she was cast because she's Zendaya.
Yeah.
And she basically is a celebutante, and whether or not she has any real talent, I guess we'll find out. Mm-hmm. This was very difficult for me to say because I absolutely loved her in the Spider-Man films.
Yeah, same.
But having seen her in this, it just seems like, and a lot of this is, it's Denis' fault, particularly, and his editor's fault. She's not in this film very much. She turns, she looks in the camera, she looks mysterious, and we move on. Mm-hmm. Not a whole lot of acting. So I'm reserving my judgment, just my initial, not very impressed, particularly it's going to be very hard to fill the role of Sean Young, who's
Right.
very, very striking. So those two. Did anyone have any other issues with casting, like Ryan?
It took me a while. I don't know if I would say I have a problem with Skarsgård as the Baron, but throughout the first maybe hour and a half of the movie, the makeup, I think, was to such a degree so well done that I was like, who is that? I know who it is. And usually I kind of, personally to myself, kind of pride myself on being able to figure out who people are. It's kind of a fun game I play, but that one kind of tricked me for a while. But once it hit me, I kind of was like, oh, that's pretty cool. I mean, I've been a fan of his and some of his
Mamma Mia.
problem with it. I think it just was more of a surprise to me. You mentioned it. I want to know more as to why, Dylan, you feel that way. Or not, but from the point of time on film, and I think that we're hopefully going to be convinced of her. But I think that she's obviously there as kind of like a she's there for a reason to kind of suggest that the lead up to her involvement in the second piece is going to be much more prominent thing to, for a director to kind of grapple with, I think, is to introduce a character, but not really introduce the character, just to kind of say, this one's there and just wait for it and trust me. A difficult thing to pull off. I think he did pull it off. Be kind of a questioning or a disagreement as to, why she's in the first movie in the first place, or why her development is so limited. So really have many critiques. I admit that I'm flawed when I view movies as beautiful as Dune, and it's hard for me to kind of not come out and say, oh my God, that was amazing, just off of spectacle alone. I have to watch it again. And probably the second time around, I'll say like, I wonder why they chose to do this, or I might have a critique or two, but as it stands now, I'm a pretty hardcore fan.
Well, it's a very beautiful movie.
Yeah.
That's for sure. And it fits in with his oeuvre.
Mm-hmm.
That's for sure.
It'll win for best cinematography.
It has to.
Yeah.
It has to.
I said the same thing about 2049 when it came out. I walked out of the theater, said that's going to win the Oscar for cinematography, and it did. And I just think he's got who is the cinematographer on this?
Greg Fraser.
Yeah.
I was surprised it wasn't Roger Deakins, but it shows you how Roger Deakins is having just an enormous a grasp on the influence in filmmaking all over the world.
Yeah, definitely.
It was kind of like when Fargo came out, I walked out and I thought, holy crap. I just could not believe the cinematography in Fargo. And then within 2 or 3 years, a lot of movies started looking like Fargo, just pulling back. And who's doing a lot of it, believe it or not, was Janusz Kaminski. He was Deakins is just a big fan of just pulling the camera back and just showing you everything. And Kaminski started doing that. He started pulling it back and showing everything. And he works a lot with Spielberg. And so as a consequence, a lot of Spielberg films after 2000, they look a lot like Fargo. This is very, very bizarre, but it is wonderful for Spielberg's storytelling technique. I'll tell you that. But it's a credit to him, because not too many old dogs will take new tricks, but Spielberg is all about finding new ways to do things. Roger Deakins is exceptional, but this guy obviously, and of course there's influence from the director as well.
Yeah.
Now, ending the film on the duel. There's another problem I had. with it. I thought that it was much more powerful to just cut to Paul and Jessica alone in the desert. What are we going to do? Where are we going to go? How are we going to survive? Credits. Is that too much of a downer? Because I was looking forward to opening part 2 with the duel. Just immediately you're introduced into danger. I am in a dangerous place. These people are dangerous, and we have to move on. Thoughts?
Yeah, 2 thoughts. First thought, I'm triggered. Second, canceled. No, I think the thought I genuinely had while watching the film and watching the duel, knowing that we're almost done with the runtime, I was like, people are going to hate this. I think the ending here. But for me as a book fan, I'm like, book fans, I think, or at least me, I knew I was going to love it because it was a climax, not in the traditional sense of action, although there is action in the fight, but it's more of a climax of character development. It's Paul's point of no return. So he's never killed someone, just as Lady Jessica says. He easily could have killed Jameis a few times, so much so that Stilgar thinks that he's toying with Jameis. But this is the whole movie, Paul's having visions of his potential future. And he's been having visions of Jameis, which is a change from the book, which was something I was like, is Jameis going to be in part 2? Is he not going to die? So for him, Jameis to die, that was a big shock for me. I had no idea what to expect, as knowing the story of the book and then having Jameis die after all.
I think he does have visions of Jameis in the book.
Oh, does he?
Because he thinks that Jameis is going to be a part of his life.
I was under the impression that there's much more in the movie.
I could be wrong, but I think
I don't remember the beginning of the book. I remember in the book that he was having visions of this girl in a desert and he didn't know who that they were. So when I saw that in the film, I was really encouraged.
Yeah,
because it's not in a Lynch film, and I thought, well, it shows. And particularly Paul's reaction to the spice, I thought was brilliant.
Yeah,
it was very well handled. But the visions of Jameis was really confusing because you knew that they weren't going to really see each other all that much after the duel, and you knew that was coming. So that was just confusing, and it was confusing to a lot of other viewers, like my wife as well.
I think the visions of Jameis in the book go to show that Paul isn't necessarily seeing the future that will happen. I think he's taking it in as like one route that the future could go. And then when he kills Jameis, he has this thought of like, oh, see, this is why I have to be careful with my visions, because I thought he was going to be a part of my life.
Right. That's what I think for the movie was doing. I do not remember visions of Jameis in the book.
I think it happens in the book. But
that's a good point, Laura, because he says to the Reverend Mother in the Jom Gabar scene in the beginning, she asks him specifically, do all your visions come true? And he says, well, not always, and not the right ways. So that's a good point. So,
yeah, I thought it's great setup, an interesting place to end, but I really loved it from a character point. And yes, point of no return. He's now part of the Fremen. I definitely liked it, but I could see how other moviegoers would find it awkward to end there. But of course, the final scene when they're walking along the desert and they see, a brief glimpse of a Fremen on the sandworm, and they say "Desert Hour" with Hans Zimmer's score. I'm just like, is this the best movie I've ever seen? So many Denis Villeneuve's films, about 4 or 5 of his films are in my top 100 list, and Sicario and Arrival are in my top 10. But so many times when you watch it, Christopher Nolan kind of has gotten away from this, but Denis does blend the spectacle with the character development, the emotion, what you need. You can't just have pure spectacle. That's kind of a big problem I had with Tenet, which was that it was mostly spectacle, and I couldn't really grasp it at certain points what characters were thinking or wanting. But yeah, it's just Denis. just when he wrote at the end there, that final scene, I'm like, yeah, this is everything for me. This is, can I marry this movie? Google, can I marry a movie?
I would like to point out, not to be too critical of myself, but there are 489 pages in the novel that do not include the enormous appendice and vocabulary. Mm-hmm. And he meets Johnny on page 285. Mm-hmm. So, that's almost 60% of the way. I don't want to be too harsh.
Yeah, I will say that the marketing campaign went way too hard on Zendaya and set a false expectation. That I will agree with. Not the movie's fault. That's the marketing's fault. However, it is kind of natural for the story because Paul continuously has visions of Chani, so he knows her, what she looks like, and vaguely how she acts. So the whole time in that first half, it's just set up. You're like, when are we going to meet her? When are we going to meet her? When are we going to meet her? And I think that very much is mirrored in the film. It's like all this setup, and then at the very end, you meet her, and since it's a two-parter, we're just going to have to wait for the payoff there. But yeah, I didn't have a problem with Zendaya's performance. Like we've alluded to, she's not in it a lot, but I think she's a talented actress. I'd recommend Euphoria on HBO Max. Not the greatest show, but she is a standout. She's the lead, and she won an Emmy for her performance. So I'd recommend that show.
Okay. The last paragraph of Dune on page 49. Do you know so little of my son? Jessica whispered. See that princess standing there, so haughty and confident. They say she has pretensions of a literary nature. Let us hope she finds solace in such things. She'll have little else. A bitter laugh escaped Jessica. Think on it, Chani. That princess will have the name, yet she'll live as less than a concubine, never to know a moment of tenderness from the man to whom she's bound. While we, Chani, we who carry the name of concubine, history will call us wives. So after that, and I turn the page and I find, oh shit, that's the end of the book. That's when I was like, well, that was the literary equivalent of a mic drop. Yeah. That was Frank Herbert basically saying after 489 pages, I pulled the rug under from you because really what matters in this story are the women. Thoughts?
Yeah.
Laura?
So Dylan, you want to know? So I just finished the book again yesterday. And after rereading that, my first thought was this is exactly how Hamilton ends. Because the whole time we think that the musical Hamilton, and I read the book by Ron Chernow, it's also fantastic, but you think that the book and the musical are about Hamilton and Aaron Burr. But what they're really about is how the women behind them are the ones who documented their lives and is the reason that we can have these conversations about these interesting founding fathers. And the whole point of that show, I think, is not only to focus on the lost history of those figures, but to also remind everybody that the women are the ones who are continuously forgotten even further because they're not talked about and they're not documented because they were documenting things for other people, but they're not, useless characters in the lives of these people. So the fact that Dune ended on that actually shot it up a lot in my respect, I guess, because I was like, hell yeah, like the reason we have all of the Princess Irulan writings is because she was there documenting those things. And that made it really special, I think, at the end. I don't know how I missed that the last time that I read the book, but I think it had just completely lost me in how labyrinthine it is. And this time I was a lot more focused because of the movie. I feel like I could kind of visualize things a little bit better. And so things were sticking. And then by the end, I was just like, all right, like I'm here for the book again. I'm refocused. I like this a lot better than the first time I read it.
Excellent. excellent. I felt the same way. I felt like I could read anything the Princess Irulan wrote.
Yes, it's really interesting. And honestly, those were my favorite parts the first time that I read the book, because I think that something that Dune is trying to say, something that I actually think is really impressive about it, is the thousands and thousands of years of history that have not only come before it, but you also know Frank Herbert and his son kind of tried to document after the original trilogy. And that's something that's really hard to do, even in a history book. It's hard to cover. Isn't the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, that can take someone years to read all those volumes. Like, it's really hard to document history, even a couple hundred years worth of history. Even like I just talked about Hamilton, like that's a 600-page book about Alexander Hamilton, and it loses people sometimes. But Dune is about thousands of years of preparing for something to happen. But not only that, it's preparing for something to fail. And like, what's the next step past that? So that's a really interesting thing that Dune does. It's like of history condensed in this book. The Princess this through and picks out the important things to focus on and sort of use as text to teach people thousands of years in the future. That's really interesting to me.
I found the chapter introductions by the Princess Irulan. I found those so influential, actually, that in my second book, I actually kind of copied that and to throw some light on what was going on with my main character. Just a shameless copy invention.
No, that's smart.
Herbert's son has actually now written more books than his father has, and I've read a couple of them, The Machine War and so forth. And the big one is the Sisterhood of Dune, which is about the founding of the Bene Gesserit. I haven't dove that deep into it, but they're way more entertaining than, say, the last 3 or 4 Dune books that Herbert wrote. Now, regarding the sequel, has anyone read Dune Messiah? No.
I have, yeah.
You have, yeah. And I got to say, it was probably the best sequel I've ever read. It has to be in my Rushmore of best sequels, literary sequels. Did it have that impact on you?
Thematically rich, yes. And from a philosophical point, and the themes I really enjoyed and appreciated. It's very rich, and that's a plus of the original 6 books that Frank Herbert wrote. However, I think I didn't enjoy it in the traditional sense. I enjoyed the philosophy lesson, but I didn't enjoy it from a narrative standpoint, just because, I mean, by design, it's not supposed to be enjoyable. The whole message is that being the ruler sucks. And it's about a genocide and about how, the failings of Paul amidst his triumph. So, yeah, I have a weird relationship with it. I predict that Denis Villeneuve is going to make the sequel. He is making it. But I don't think he has talks of a trilogy. I actually don't think that's going to happen, just because I don't know how they would depict that book, adapt it, because it's not a traditional story. It's just a big kind of lesson about how being the leader sucks, and it's a huge downer. You're hearing it now, folks. I'm putting money down that Denis Villeneuve will only make two Dune movies.
Well, that's a shame, because the Dune Messiah and Children of Dune were rolled into one TV show.
Yeah,
and it was absolutely horrible, like you say. I think they got Susan Sarandon to play the Reverend Mother, Lady Jessica.
Yep, I love her.
And the
Leto the second,
right. Yeah. And however, I'm a huge fan of that second book, because although you're right, that's what's going on the face. And Laura, have you read it by chance?
I haven't.
Okay, so you're going to have to read it and let me know if I'm picking up what Herbert was putting down, because I caught something else going on by the time it was over. And Danny can share with you the ending if he so chooses. But by the time it's over, it was like a very highly engineered Steven Soderbergh script. everything that was going on was deliberately set forward into play and manipulated by the Harkonnens to make Paul do certain things, go certain places, and find out certain things to put him into a specific place at a specific time of their choosing. The entire book is a setup, and you don't find that out until the last page, and then the novel ends.
Interesting.
And I was really blown away by that. And then Children of Dune was a bit of a letdown, but it has its charm as well. I'm hoping for a part 3, which will be Dune Messiah. And if he wants to end it there, fine. Children of Dune does not necessarily end on an up note, but it's way more of an up note than Dune Messiah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
So if he wants to end the series on an up note, I would recommend doing Children of Dune and maybe just pepping it up a bit. That coronation scene at the end of Lynch's film, where the House Atreides is there intermingled with the Fremen, and there's this amazing score by Toto just blasting at you. And they bring the coat, and they put it around Paul's shoulders, and the angels are singing, and Aaliyah is there, his daughter, his little sister. And you know that at some point Aaliyah is going to take over as the theocratic dictator of Arrakis. That was a really powerful scene. It really was. It must have been what the kings of France felt after their coronation.
Yeah.
I thought it was spectacular.
Nice.
All right. Are we ready for the Rushmore run?
Let's do it.
All right, Ryan. Top 5 or ish 4 or 5 books you've ever read.
All right. In no particular order.
We're not talking about a 1, 2, 3, 4. We're not going to use the word best.
It's too hard. It's too hard across mediums too. Let's see. The World According to Garp by John Irving. Incredible. I saw the Robin Williams film a long time ago. I don't really remember it, so I can't really speak to it, but it's a fantastic book. And I say in conjunction with that, Cider House Rules by John Irving is absolutely incredible. I'm a huge Chuck Palahniuk fan. Favorite author. I can't deny the impact that Fight Club had on me when I was, I think, 19 or 20. By John Krakauer, documenting the Everest disaster in the 90s. Either a movie or a docuseries. But John Krakauer is an amazing storyteller and documentarian. Into the Wild is wonderful as well. The Martian, I thought, as a comedic sci-fi, thriller, really, was wonderfully written. And I'm giving follow-ups to these because there's authors that have multiple books that I can't really choose from. And Artemis, one of his more recent novels, is great too. And then Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Those would be, I think my top five books.
Okay. Laura?
Ryan, we're going to have to talk about John Irving sometime because A Prayer for Owen Meany is close to one of my top 5 books. That's one with a really good payoff and a lot of setup, but for a very fun payoff in the very end. But so no particular order, but my first one on the list is Les Mis. I adore that book. Speaking of history and historical tomes, oh my God, I love that book. I love that musical. The second one is a book from my childhood. It's a YA book, but it's called From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler. I know it's a really long title, but it's an absolutely delightful, quick read. There's an audiobook of it that sometimes I honestly just throw on. I think it's like 8 hours. I just listen to it in one day during work. It's really, really fun. Third one is 11/22/63, another super long book, but I can't get enough of that story. It's so good. The fourth on the list is one that I actually just read and I could have put down, but Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Oh my God. Perfect, in my opinion. I think I read it in 2 days because I honestly couldn't put it down. And my fifth one, because it scared me so much when I read it when I was going to school in the Midwest, is In Cold Blood. Oh my God. Just thrilling. So yeah, I think those are some of my top fives.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Danny?
That's great. Yeah, I'm a big Kurt Vonnegut guy. I was introduced to him in college, actually. I hadn't read any of his books before then. So Slaughterhouse-Five is his most famous one, arguably. And then also Cat's Cradle, which they've been trying to turn into a movie for decades. I don't think it'll ever happen. It's not really a traditional narrative, but haunting book, allegory for nuclear weapons. And then I don't normally like short story books, but a Kurt Vonnegut short story book is Welcome to the Monkey House. And I did a report in college on the Euphoria question, which is a short story in there. It blew my mind. So yeah, Welcome to the Monkey House, a great compendium of his stories. Pillars of the Earth, which is my brother Tim's favorite book. He recommended that to me, and I'm not a big reader until this podcast, but I read that 1,000-page book pretty quickly. Call It Courage, which is a kid's book, but I remember reading that in third grade and it had just made such a huge impression on me. I love it. Dune, of course, Dune is my favorite book, but we've already talked about that a bunch. And then finally, I guess not finally, damn, I have two more. 11/22/63, I'll echo what Laura said about that. And then finally, my favorite book that we've covered on the pod, next to Dune and 11/22/63, Rosemary's Baby. Wow, it's exactly beat for beat the movie. Exactly. We talked about that, but yeah, amazing, tense from the opening sentence to the last scene. So yeah, that's my Rushmore.
And Dylan, do you have a top five?
I do. Before I get to that, I wanted to go back to Ryan, since you say you're a huge Palahniuk fan. I read Fight Club 2 after I saw the film because I think the film is in my Rushmore of films, for sure. I really enjoyed the book. Have you read Pygmy?
I read Pygmy about 5 or 6 years ago. I've got my copy in my bedroom. It's if you go into it as a satire, I think it's easier to digest. If you don't understand, kind of Palahniuk's, you don't have to understand his life, but you need to understand his influences and where he has, come to be compelled to generate the ideas that he has. I think I made the statement a couple of weeks ago that he is the author that best expresses the maybe philosophical seedy underbelly of American culture. The phrase just kind of came to me when I was driving in the car a couple of weeks ago. But Pygmy, if you understand it as a satire and for what it's supposed to be, is a wonderfully dark comedic book. But if you don't, because it took me a while to kind of understand that, if you don't, you're like, I cannot believe that somebody has written this and that it's a book. Like, this is immeasurably offensive and awful. But once you realize kind of the angle, it changes the perspective of the book. I don't know if you felt the same way, but it's one of his better works.
I just can't believe he got away with it.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's the book is shocking, and there's been a few people that have done the same thing. I was thinking of Anthony Burgess when he wrote A Clockwork Orange. The entire book is written in dialect. And Stephen King did the same thing with Dolores Claiborne. where he introduced like a main country accent, and he wrote the entire book in that accent. No chapters, no paragraphs. I don't think there's any indentions into it. It's just
Train Spotting is very similar to.
Yes, it is.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, even that's Irvine Welsh, if I remember correctly. And even Welsh's descriptive paragraphs, which are the narrative he's trying to tell, are in that dialect.
Yeah.
Palahniuk was doing that with Pygmy from an adult who looks like a child. So he's inserted into this capitalist host family coming from a what we assume to be a country kind of like Albania that's been brainwashed by communism for half a century, and the redacted nature of all of it and how he was looking at American institutions and things that we take for granted was very, it reminded me of this essay I saw in college called Rituals of the Nasarima, where it was describing what the Nasarima Native Americans were doing every morning when they woke up. And it was this very bizarrely written case study, anthropological study. And you were just thinking, man, these Nasarima are just the weirdest people I've ever read. But in fact, the entire thing is fake. If you read Nasarima backwards, it's Americans. And it was describing what Americans do in the bathroom to prep before they go to work, brushing your hair with your teeth with hog's hair and things of that nature. It was meant to spotlight that. I thought Pygmy was fantastic. Laura.
Yes.
You have my undying admiration for finishing Les Mis.
You know what? I finished it twice.
Whoa.
I really like it. Although I will admit some of the historical chapters, I just kind of skim.
Stieg Larsson, Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. This is one of those situations where that book came out right about the time. I was working in the oil patch at the time, and I became kind of like that guy, and I don't remember who wrote that book, Up in the Air. That guy who went through so many airports, he stopped recognizing the airports, and he went through so many cities, he stopped recognizing the cities, and just everything was the same to him. I got to that point where I had 1,000,000 miles on United or Continental, and I could go through any airport in the world. It didn't matter if I knew the language or not. And I reached that status. And if you really want to know what people are reading, don't look at the New York Times bestseller list. See what people are buying and reading in the airplanes. And I saw Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, so I picked it up and I read it on an international flight. And I thought, wow. And then I found out, of course, there was a second one and a third one. And then the Larson story behind it just makes it all that much more mysterious and so forth. And I've also thought about writing under a pseudonym and just saying on the back of the book, and he died in 2005. This is all we have left. And just seeing if I could corner the market that way. My wife doesn't like that joke. Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, I thought was interesting because you finally had a male talking about misogyny in literature. And I'm sure there were people before that, but I don't know if those people made the bestseller list.
Yeah, there were so many interesting. I mean, just the pages that separated the different parts of the book with the statistics of how many women are sexually assaulted in Sweden. Oh, gosh, yeah. I mean, it's not even really part of the story, but it is part of the story. Like that's the foundation for why the entire story is able to happen.
Did you see the Swedish films?
No, we are going to cover it for the podcast. Like I said, we wanted to do a Christmas episode. So I read it. I haven't seen it.
We're not doing it on Christmas. No. It's
like the Christmassy story. Cause I haven't seen
it. It was marketed as the feel bad movie of Christmas.
Yeah.
So Ryan's expression there was classic when he said that.
That's Naomi Rapace, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. It's I give it a 9 or a 10 out of 10. I mean, it's one of my favorite. I didn't have it on my movies list, but it's one of my favorite movies. It's incredible. It's brutal, but it's incredible. She's one of my favorite actors too. I think everything she touches turns to gold.
Naomi Rapace?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. That I really like that first movie and the second movie as well. The third one, I think, tails off quite a bit, unfortunately. The guy who plays, what is the Blomkvist, the investigator, the journalist?
Blomkvist, yeah.
Yeah. The guy who plays him is not ideal, I'll say. Daniel Craig is a much better, because he's supposed to be this ladies' man.
Yeah.
And I don't think the actor really did a very good job of conveying that. And there are some scenes, particularly, I remember when they're driving to like the Wenger compound, and he just has like this blank expression on his face, like he's looking at a taco or something. And it didn't print out very well. When you run over something like that with a master like David Fincher, it's obviously just going to be crazy. But one thing I didn't understand about the Fincher version, it's actually quite frankly pissed me off. You guys seen the Fincher version?
No, I haven't seen any of the movie adaptations. No.
Okay, well, you know how to bookend, so I'm not going to. There's no spoiling that. But the end of the book actually takes place in Australia.
Yeah.
Where he goes to Australia and he finds Harriet and he reveals her to us, the audience. So in the film, the same thing is done, but it's done in London. Blomkvist flies to London and then unveils this is Harriet. Does not have the same dramatic impact. Now, in terms of cost and budget, like really, this is David Fincher. This is a Warner Brothers film. How much the fuck is it going to cost to fly everybody out to the California desert to film 15 minutes or less? I mean, I know Fincher is expensive, but the fact that they wouldn't splurge for that is just mind-boggling to me. I did not understand it at all, right? And it detracted from the ending. Like the film was ending, and I wasn't there. I was off thinking about Harriet lives in Australia. In Cold Blood, genius. No truck with that. I read Capote when I was in high school after I saw the movie. Found out there was a book. I was unprepared in reading Capote. Capote is absolutely stellar. You know, after you've read a bunch of shit and you read Capote, you feel stupid.
Yeah.
You know, him and Harper Lee. Harper Lee is great in conveying emotion.
Yeah.
My Rushmore in Lit, obviously I already mentioned Dune, so no reason to go through that. But my favorite book by far is The Razor's Edge by W. Somerset Maugham. I thought that was amazing. Youth in Revolt by C.D. Payne. Danny, I see you nodding. Do you know that one?
I've seen the film. If it's
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
I haven't read it.
No. Yeah, it's about a kid who grows up in Oakland of all places, and the film is funny, but it really does not capture 600 pages. How do you get that down to 2 hours? And it just goes on. There's 2 more books, and it's a page turner, of course, but there's like a major joke on every page, right? And it's very much like how guys think at the age of 13, 14, forever, really. And it doesn't paint us in particularly good light, and that's fine. The Reader by Bernard Schenck was amazing, about finding out the people that you love may not be the people who you think they are. Love in the Time of Cholera.
Never read that, actually.
Gabriel Garcia Marquez. He is a communist, died in the wool, but he's that and 100 Years of Solitude. Awesome books. But since Danny, you mentioned Slaughterhouse-5, I got to ask, have you read Mother Night?
I have not. That's my Vonnegut blind spot.
I think, sir, that you'll be greatly served if you take the time to take that on. I read it when I was in college. It's only like 150 pages or something. It's actually quite short. It's very, very satirical. I don't know why. I read Slaughterhouse-5. I was not on that bus. I missed that bus. Mm-hmm. A lot of people worship that book. I just didn't get it. Kind of like, what's the big one by Salinger? Catcher in the Rye. I missed that bus too. I understand what people are saying about it, but I didn't get it. So I'm sorry I'm not in the Slaughterhouse-5 fan house. However, Mother Night, I think, has replaced it for me. I totally get Mother Night.
Gotcha. Cool.
I totally get good people who do bad things hoping that good will come out of it.
Yeah.
That is an instantly human flaw. And then having no excuse why did you do those bad things? And having to cop to it and say, well, I did those bad things because I thought something good would come from it. Even if something good did come from it, you still did something bad.
Right. Very
bad. And you really have to ask yourself, is there such a thing as a good Nazi?
Right.
That's a fundamental question. And it's not just Vonnegut saying that about Nazis. It's Vonnegut saying that about everybody. And with some great punchlines in between. And Keith Gordon, who is an actor, he's probably most famously known as being in Christine, the John Carpenter film of the Stephen King book.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was in Jaws 2 and a couple other things. He's doing some episodes on Hawaii Five-0, I think recently. He's a director. He directed Midnight Clear with Gary Sinise. That got some traction about 20 years ago. But he also directed Mother Night, and he got Nick Nolte to play the lead role.
Mm.
And I thought the book did as good as a job as it could to get into it. And if you want to see a breakdown of Mother Night, or if you want to hear a podcast on the breakdown, I recommend The Projection Booth. They did an episode on it, and Mike White of The Projection Booth, he got Keith Gordon to come on to the show and talk about it as director.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Cool.
I was pretty shocked.
Yeah, I'll definitely look that up.
All right. So we're going to wind up some thoughts on Akira, on books, on film. Ryan, final thoughts? What should we read?
Well, I mean, what first comes to mind, I just started The Three-Body Problem by Cixin Liu. I think that might be a good recommendation for a narrative that is comparable to kind of the science fiction dystopian, mankind's battle for maybe seeking what is behind life or the meaning of life. So there's some evolutionary themes very heavily present in the manga for Akira that are kind of touched upon in the film. But from what I gather with The Three-Body Problem, there's similar, at least on the surface. I'm not very far into it, but there's similar ideas at play. So that might be a good parallel to dive into. That's my recommendation off the top of my head.
What's your favorite podcast? No pandering.
Favorite podcast? God, there's so many. I really like this podcast called Radio Rental, which is underneath the umbrella of Payne Lindsay, who did Up and Vanished, about the disappearance of a Georgia Miss Georgia, I think. I can't remember her name, but it's a wonderfully done docuseries. Radio Rentals is kind of the, who's the actor that plays Dwight in The Office?
Oh, Rainn Wilson.
Rainn Wilson plays a character that introduces these, stories of supernatural encounters that people have had. So these, anybody will write in and say, I've got a scary story that happened to me, and they'll be given a spot on the podcast to tell it. And it's done with creepy music, but I guess it's coming off the coattails of Halloween. That might be at the front of my mind. Yeah, it's just a fun podcast with great storytelling. I think you can't go wrong with it.
Danny, what should we be reading?
Kind of going in the sci-fi dystopian trend, taking inspiration from Akira. We're watching the show Foundation, based off of Isaac Asimov's novel and novels. I would recommend the novels. The show isn't great, unfortunately, but especially Foundation, the novel, that's seminal sci-fi literature. And also, concurrently with our podcast, I'm reading books that we're not covering by Stephen Graham Jones. One of the books that I'm reading is called Warmest Color by Katsushiro. It's a we talked a lot about diversity. He's a Native American writer. He writes horror stories, both about Native Americans, but also just about other characters, other races as well. So the books by Stephen Graham Jones, I recommend The Only Good Indians. It's terrifying, darkly funny, and perverse. So yeah, that's my rec.
What podcast should we be listening to?
My podcast recommendation for y'all is Beyond the Screenplay, where it's kind of like our podcast a little bit, where they discuss how the script changed from book to movie, but they also just discuss other movies, not based on material. And they talk specifically about the decisions made in the screenplay, how that influences the movie for the better or the worse, how stories are told. It's a really solid movie review podcast.
Laura, I didn't choose you last because you are a female, but I wanted the female to have the last word.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, she was going to cancel you.
Please.
What should we be reading?
So I was going to say one more thing before I say what we should be reading, but I wanted to give a shout out to the new Academy Award Museum that just opened in Hollywood. Danny and I went a couple weekends ago with our families, and they have an Akira exhibit, which includes 3 original cells that were shot in the movie. And I about lost my shit. I was freaking out.
Same.
And we took pictures and sent them to Ryan, and we were like, oh my God, you have to come to LA. So if you have an opportunity to come and check out that museum, was fabulous. They don't just have Akira stuff with their anime section. They've got Miyazaki cells and paintings and his original animation desk. Incredible. So highly recommend going there. And if you're interested in Akira specifically, they have cells there. So check it out. Gosh, as far as reading goes, I feel like I've been pretty married to the upcoming podcast episodes, but so I'm kind of going through a blank right now. We just read some of Clive Barker's short stories from The Forbidden, and we're going to cover Candyman, spoilers, on our podcast. And I think some of those stories were very different. I really like a good thriller and a good horror story that surprises me, because there are so many tropes out there. In fact, I just read Dracula, and sometimes it's fun to go back. I've never read that story, but sometimes it's fun to go back and see where the tropes come from, because obviously a lot was inspired by that book. So I've read so many thrillers and crime novels and horror stories that if something can scare me or creep me out or make me think of something in a different way, then I like that a lot. So The Forbidden collection.
Books of Blood.
Books of Blood.
Yeah.
Thank you. The Forbidden is a story in Books of Blood. But so those have been good. I would say that it's probably not a huge surprise that I'm a fan of Crooked Media. I like a lot of the podcasts that they put out because I'm a bleeding heart liberal, I guess.
What?
So I really enjoy the short series that they have going called This Land. It discusses 2 very topical issues going on in the Supreme Court with that have to do with Native Americans and their land rights, but also their rights over their children. So it's really interesting because I don't think that I had learned a lot about like the legal rights of Native Americans going through my, education. So it's really informative, really, really well produced.
Thanks very much, everybody, for coming on the Super 70 podcast again. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Dylan. This is absolutely so much fun. I love talking about media. No matter what it's about, books, movies, podcasts. This
is an honor. Yeah. And especially because we love our podcast, but we're limited to one topic. So to just come and completely just nerd out about different properties is a blast, a dream come true. So thank you.
Absolutely. I second that sentiment. It's been an honor to be a part of part of these past 2 collaborations, and a lot of fun, and has really kind of tapped into a creative aspect of my life that I haven't really had much, direction in pursuing. So this is a big treat for me, and I really appreciate, Dan and Laura for allowing me on their podcast to do Akira, and it's been wonderful that, these 2 episodes have been born out of it. So Dylan, it's an honor to be on your show as well. So thank you.
Thanks. I'm going to put that at the top before we even play the music.
Thanks for hanging out with me and the Film is Lit podcast. You can find them wherever you find podcasts. You can find me, my books, and my blog at www.thatdylandavis.com.